Hey guys, so today I'm gonna bring you guys a story that's a little off the beaten path. I happened to stumble across this on TV, and I was so shocked by it that I decided to do a video. It's the story of a female professional wrestler named Juana Barraza who wrestled in Mexico as the Silent Lady, who ended up being a serial killer. And she killed almost 50 people. And you talk about the dark side of the ring. This is the darkest side of the ring. So from the mid 90s to the early 2000s, this lady was on a crime spree, including robberies, stick ups, and ultimately just turning straight to serial killings. It's going to be an absolutely. I'm going to read a couple of articles on this subject to talk about Miss Baratza and what led to her doing this, give her some background and all that type of stuff. And this is truly, like I said, the darkest side of any ring. This is the stuff of nightmares. So strap in and get ready, and let's talk about Juana Barraza, the Silent Lady. Let's go. The New York Times: woman held in Mexico City, serial killings, by dated January 26, 2006. A woman who sold popcorn and worked as a professional wrestler was arrested here Wednesday on charges that she murdered at least 10 elderly women over the last 2 years, the authorities said. Here it would be Mexico City. The suspect, Juana Barraza, 48, was arrested after a tenant saw her running from the house of an 82-year-old woman just found strangled with a stethoscope in a working-class neighborhood in the city of Mexico City, prosecutors said. Investigators then matched the fingerprints of Ms. Barraza to those left at the scene of other killings, the police said. Hotel Ortega Cuevas, the chief of Mexico City's police force, was quoted by El Universal newspaper as saying Ms. Barraza had coolly confessed to being what has become known as the little old lady killer. For years, investigators have been tracking a killer they believed was a man disguised as a woman, responsible for possibly dozens of daytime deaths. The killer always followed the same pattern, getting into the homes of elderly women who lived alone, either after not offering to carry in groceries or knocking on the door and pretending to be a social worker. Analysis of the crime scene suggested that the killer strangled the victims from behind with articles of their own clothing or other effects from their homes. The bodies were left on a chair or bed. The killer often rifled the house and stole something small, often a religious statue. The city police, who are not known for their investigative prowess, caught a break in July when the killer left a full fingerprint at the house of a woman whom the police believed was a prospective victim. The son of the woman had dropped in and spotted someone fleeing. The print was matched to partial prints from 5 other slayings. The police now say that it belongs to Mrs. Barraza and that they have other evidence linking her to at least 10 killings and 1 attempted murder. The killings had shaken the cultural myth here that older people are protected by loving extended families and exposed the fact that more and more older Mexicans live alone in a city where families are dispersed. It also aroused terror among the city's older residents. So, this is just one of the articles on the subject. This is kind of gives a good overview of what happened. Now we're going to get into some of the meat and potatoes that's going to give the background of this lady. This comes from Mail Magazine. The female luchador who was also Mexico's notorious old lady killer. This is a pretty long article, so strap in. La Dama del Silencio wasn't a great wrestler. If anything, she could normally be found hitting the ropes at amateur events, somewhere toward the bottom of the card or selling popcorn, as she was frequently injured. Nor was her name, translating to the Quiet Lady, one that struck fear into the hearts of those who paid to see her grapple. Her ring gear, a butterfly mask, strapped pink leggings, frizzy orange hair, didn't help much either. Not to mention, once she took off that butterfly lucha mask, the woman born Juana Dainara de Barraza Semperio looked as though she could be your mother. At the same time, however, her ring name hinted at how she lived under the radar for so long. In fact, on January 25, 2006, after being arrested on suspicions of killing between 42 and 48 elderly women, making her Mexico's first recorded female solo serial killer, she told the police that she chose the name because I'm quiet and keep myself to myself. She quietly snuck into her victims' lives too, posing as a nurse just there to selflessly help with their care before brutally strangling many of them with a stethoscope cord. Barraza was born December 27, 1957, in Espazoyucan, Hidalgo, a rural area situated to the north of Mexico City. Barraza's mother, Justa Sampiero, was an alcoholic and a sex worker. She was also just 13 when she gave birth to Barraza. She left Barraza's father, truck driver Trinidad Barraza, 3 months after the baby's birth, tired of his philandering. Reports state he fathered as many as 32 children, though he concedes himself that he lost count. It's alleged Samperio, who fell pregnant shortly after meeting Trinidad, gave care of her daughter away to an elderly man named Jose Lugo in exchange for 3 beers. Barraza was 12 at the time. A year later, Barraza would become pregnant by him. She'd miscarry, only to fall pregnant again at 16. She'd miscarry one more time. Finally, after her mother succumbed to cirrhosis in 1980, Barraza felt liberated enough to escape the horror of her existence and fled to Mexico City. Not even 20, she never learned to read or write. It's said that the resentment she felt towards her mother for allowing her childhood to be so wretched, so fearful, and so abusive never dimmed. A handful of marriages followed. Many were abusive. Still, they resulted in 4 children, though some reports placed the number at 7. Her eldest expired at age 24, never recovering from injuries sustained either, depending on conflicting reports, from being attacked with a baseball bat or being shot during a skirmish between rival gangs. At trial, Barraza stated that this was when her rage began to spiral out of control. Her second child, a girl, married young and left home early, though at the time of her mother's arrest, she was living close to Barraza's first-floor rental on the Eastern Bridge of Mexico City. It's here where Barraza lived with her 2 other children, a boy, 13, and a girl, 11. Their elder sister stepped in when their mother was taken away. Like most, her life of crime started small. In 1995, after the birth of child number 4, she began to steal from shops. The money from her wrestling gigs weren't nearly enough to make ends meet. Next, she moved on to home burglary, pawning the jewelry and other valuables she lifted in the process. Then, in 1996, she and her friend Araceli Tapia Martinez came up with a new criminal enterprise. They both dressed as nurses and robbed elderly people who lived alone. In time, however, Martinez would betray Barraza. It's believed that the first murder took place in Mexico City on November 25, 2002. The victim was a 64-year-old Martina de la Luz Gonzalez Anaya. She'd been beaten and strangled to death, her body left sprawled on her couch. The following year, beginning with 84-year-old Guillermina Leona Oropreza on March 2nd and ending with Alicia Cota Ducoin on November 28th. Barraza is believed to have taken 7 more lives. The year after that, the annual body count hit 14, including 70-year-old Maria Dolores Martinez Benavides, who was strangled with a stethoscope so violently that her neck snapped. In 2005, the year after Barraza's capture, the death toll reached 18. Her oldest victim was her second to last, 92-year-old Maria de los Angeles Reper Hernandez. She had been strangled with her own scarf, her face beaten to a pulp. Almost immediately, a theory developed that the killer may have been playing the role of a government official, lulling their victims into a false sense of security by offering them a chance to sign up for some kind of social welfare program. We're dealing with a brilliant mind. Bernardo Batiz, the chief prosecutor in Mexico City, was quoted as saying at the time, other theories were less plausible. E.g., at one point it was believed that because 3 of the victims owned a print of the painting by 18th century French artist Jean-Baptiste Gurriez, a boy in a waist raincoat, the murders were somehow all connected through art. Similarly, after a perceived break in the case in 2005, it was suggested that maybe the killer had ended their life. Fingerprints from the crime scenes were subsequently cross-referenced with any corpses in Mexico City, mortuaries that had been recently fallen victim to suicide. Nobody, however, believed that the killer could be a woman. With only 15% of serial killers thought to be female, nobody ever does. In fact, As late as 1998, famed FBI profiler Roy Hazelwood would claim there are no female serial killers, despite the first serial killer on record probably being a woman, Locusta, an infamous Gaul-born prisoner who was beloved by Nero. I guess these are Romans. And yet, while Barraza was on the loose, now does El Matavillas, or the old lady killer, multiple witness statements confidently claim that they seen someone in women's clothing fleeing from several of the crime scenes, a prominent sighting being one of a broad-shouldered woman in a red dress. There was also historical precedent in the country for such a cold-blooded female killer. Los Ponquinquiches is the name given to two sisters, Delfina and Maria del Jesus Gonzalez from Guanajuato, who between the early 1950s and mid-1960s operated a prostitution ring they called Rancho El Angel. They sourced talent by kidnapping young women after they responded to ads placed by the sisters requesting employment as housemaids. Instead, they forced the women to ingest huge amounts of cocaine and heroin before pimping them out and killing them when their looks failed or if they resisted in any way. Police found the bodies of 80 women, 11 men, and several fetuses when they raided the sisters' property. When asked how the bodies had gotten there, one of the sisters reportedly claimed the food didn't sit well with them. Still, Mexican authorities focused their investigation on Mexico's transgender community because of reports that the suspect was wearing women's clothes. 49 people were brought in for questioning, but to no avail. The LGBTQ community was outraged. In December 2003, the police, more or less clutching at straws, released two eyewitness sketches of the alleged Maravillas. One was slightly more feminine than the other. Then, as if to corroborate just how confused they were about the line of inquiry to focus on, they released two often contradictory profiles of who they believed the killer to be. One was a physical profile. The killer is a man dressed as a woman, they claimed, or a robust woman dressed in white, height between 1.7 and 1.75 meters, basically around 5'6", robust complexion, light brown, oval eyes, wide cheeks, blonde hair, delineated eyebrows, and approximately 45 years old. The psychological profile drew upon cases of serial killers who had targeted elderly women in Spain and France, specifically Thierry Paulin, or the Beast of Montmartre, or whatever, who between 1984 and 1987 has slain as many as 25 elderly women. Nevertheless, the resulting profile was pretty cliched stuff. The killer is a man with homosexual preferences and a victim of childhood physical abuse, it read. He could have had a grandmother or lived with an elderly person and had resentment to that feminine figure and possessed great intelligence. The case finally turned in late 2005 with the murder of 82-year-old Carmen Camila Gonzalez Miguel, the mother of noted Mexican criminologist Luis Rafael Moreno Gonzalez. It inspired the police to launch a new operation, Operación Parques y Jardines. Translation: Operation Parks and Gardens. Patrolling areas where the killer had struck previously were ramped up, and thousands of flyers warning of stranger danger were distributed. Police even paid elderly women to act as bait in park areas. They apprehended Barraza a few months later. She was spotted by the live-in tenant of a woman named Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, and she was fled the scene of what would prove to be her final killing. Inside the flat, 84-year-old landlady Reyes Alfaro lay strangled to death. Barraza was picked up by a passing police patrol. On her person was a stethoscope, pension forms, and a social worker identification card. The police obtained a search warrant for her address and, despite her illiteracy, found a room in which newspaper clippings of her crime were methodically stored, as well as objects that had belonged to the victims. Barraza's home also featured an altar with figurines of the folk saint Jesus Malverde, often referred to as the Angel of the Poor, and within Mexican culture, a Robin Hood type figure, and Santa Muerte, who within Mexican folk Catholicism is a personification of death itself. I only killed one little old lady, not the others, Barraza vowed when she first appeared in court. It isn't right to pin the others on me. She was asked to provide a motive for her crimes. I got angry, she replied. She later added, I killed old ladies because my mother mistreated me, bit me, cursed at me, and sold me to an old man. On March 31st, 2008, Barraza was found guilty on 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary, including 11 separate accounts of murder. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison. She showed little emotion as she heard the verdict. May God forgive you and not forget me, she said upon hearing the judge's words. She won't be eligible for parole until 2058, at which time she'll be 100 years old. These days, Barraza spent her days selling tacos to other inmates in Mexico City's Santa Marta Acatila prison. Her specialty is said to be conchita pibil, a slow-roasted, spicy pork dish that's Yucatan in origin. Her name still carries currency within Mexican pop culture. Case in point, the cumbia singer Amanditita, who, as a former guest on El Rey Network's excellent wrestling show Lucha Underground, shows a bit about Lucha Libre herself, wrote a hit song about her. Las Matavillas wants to get rid of your grandmother, goes the vocal, over a fusion of rock, reggae, and rap. No one can stop this shameless person. She is a professional wrestler. She used to call herself La Damica del Silencio. No one suspected or could have imagined such a thing. This killer could be your neighbor. She also got married to 74-year-old Miguel Angel, another prisoner at Santa Marta Acatila, who is serving a life sentence for murder. He courted Barraza for years via mail, though the two never met until their wedding day. They saw each other just 3 times, for a total of about 2 hours in all. Maybe that's why the marriage only lasted a year. Once we saw each other, the love vanished, Barraza reportedly told a deputy. In terms of her wrestling career, one of her last appearances before arrest was on a Mexican TV show. On it, she talked about her life as a wrestler and why she was definitely the quiet lady. She also promised viewers that no matter the name, her character was definitely bad to the core. Maybe then, the old lady killer was hiding in plain sight all along. Okay, this part is from The Guardian. It's called The Lady Killer. Around midday on January 25th this year in Mexico City, 48-year-old single mother Juana Barraza approached an elderly woman named Ana Maria dos los Reyes, entering her house and asking for a glass of water. Once inside, Barraza picked up a stethoscope that happened to be lying on the living room table and used it to strangle her hostess. She was detained shortly afterwards as she hurried from this murder scene, identified by the victim's lodger. He had seen Barraza leave just before stumbling on his landlady's corpse. The news of Barraza's arrest spread fast. The serial killer, whom the local press had dubbed Matavillas, the little old lady killer, had been caught. Since 2003, the Matavillas had been linked to 32 murders in Mexico City. All the victims were elderly women, usually strangled with cables, scarves, or stockings. Eyewitnesses had described a masculine-looking woman hanging around several murder scenes, and given the rarity of female serial killers, profilers were convinced the serial was a transvestite. Almost 4 months from her arrest, Barraza had been charged with 10 murders, pleading guilty to just one, strangling Reyes, and not guilty on the others. City prosecutors have told reporters that they hope to charge her for 27 murders, and they apparently have fingerprints putting her at the scene of at least 11. I only killed one little old lady, not the others, Barraza told the court on her first appearance in February. It isn't right to pin the others on me. Asked to reveal her motive, she simply said, I got angry. What makes her story even more sensational is her hobby. When she was detained, Barraza looked respectable and unremarkable, with neatly cut hair and conservative clothes. But she had always been so restrained, indulging a fanatical enthusiasm for the sport of lucha libre, Mexican masked wrestling. Lucha libre typically involves titanic battles between fighters with cartoon character names and costumes who are identified as technicos, good guys who fight by the rules, and rudos, villains who break them. Interviewed by a major television channel at a wrestling event just a few weeks before her arrest, Barraza described herself as rudo to the core. She was often seen in the front rows of the established arenas, and often also organized wrestling events for small-town fiestas, occasionally fighting in the ring herself. Her wrestling persona, La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence, she reportedly told police she chose the title because I am quiet and keep myself to myself. When it comes to Mexican trials, there are no juries and few public hearings. Instead, prosecutors and defense lawyers present their evidence to a single judge during largely closed-door proceedings that can last a few years. But if the formal legal process is slow, Barraza's public trial in the local media was all but over in the first couple of days. Within hours of her arrest, Barraza was paraded before the cameras, posed beside a plastine bust of the prime suspect made during the hunt, to which she bears some resemblance. The police also released snaps of her recreating the murder of Reyes for detectives, along with videoed excerpts of her initial police investigation. All this before she had even been remanded in custody. The presumption of innocence is not clearly established there, says Emilio Alvarez, human rights ombudsman for Mexico City. The media has become the great judge. As the trial inches along, the defensive strategy has mixed Barraza's claim that she is being scapegoated for all but one of the murders, with attempts to get her declared mentally unfit to stand trial. However, prosecutors told local reporters last month that psychological studies of Barraza, ordered by the defense, had concluded that she was entirely conscious of her actions. She was born in 1956 in a poverty-stricken village in a largely rural state of Hidalgo, just north of Mexico City, and certainly has the difficult background that often typifies cases of mental disturbance. She has never learned to read or write, much beyond her name, and media reports confirmed by her defense lawyer described an early childhood in charge of an alcoholic mother who gave her away at the age of 12, some say in exchange for 3 beers. Barely pubescent, she was repeatedly raped by her new guardian or a third man, versions vary, becoming pregnant and giving birth to a boy. While the details of the abuse differ, there seems little doubt that Barraza harbors deep resentment towards her mother for letting the abuse happen. Miguel Ontiveros, the criminologist associated with the case, believes Barraza was so damaged by her experiences, she ended up targeting old ladies because she identified them with her mother. Within this context, Barraza's own relationship with her 4 children by 3 different fathers, seemingly remarkably stable, if marked by tragedy. Her eldest died as a young man from injuries received when muggers attacked him with a baseball bat. Her second child, a girl, married early and left home, although she stayed close to her mother's modest ground floor rented flat on the very edge of Mexico City. Barraza lived there with her youngest 2 children, a boy aged 13, a girl aged 11, who are now staying with their elder sister. According to her lawyer, the accused is proud to say she has kept things going with her on her own. She is proud of being both a father and mother to her children. Barraza seems to have supported the family through a mixture of domestic work, street vending, and petty theft. Neighbors in this otherwise largely middle-class area describe the children as friendly and their mother as always pleasant in passing. But what attracts the attention of criminal anthropologist Elena Aziola is how far Juana Barraza, if she is guilty, has strayed from the trends revealed by her study of convicted Mexican murderers a decade ago. A Mexican woman killing even just one little old lady is virtually unheard of. How much of our society must have changed if it can produce a female Matajavillas? That's it. This has been a absolutely bizarre story. You know, you talk about this lady who had this really tragic life, and this kind of not a surprise how it begins. You know, you're abused as a child, and you go on to abuse others, and but you'll never hear about this kind of stuff. This is truly the darkest side of any ring. This is a serial killer, and she's killed almost 50 people. And there's a lot of folks who never heard of this. And I happened to stumble upon it. Like I said, I stumbled upon it on television and looked it up. And there's a book on the subject. I'll probably look to the book if you're interested on Amazon. I haven't read the book, obviously, but it sounds like it might be interesting to read. But what do you guys think about this story? Like this video, share, and subscribe. And I'll talk to you guys later.